to another part of our American Made series. Tonight we're doing Campbell soup and Heinz ketchup, and I'm going to begin with Campbell soup. How many of you have opened a can of soup on a cold winter day or grabbed a can of chicken noodle soup when you were feeling sick? Perhaps after a long day at work, you opened a jar of pasta sauce for a quick spaghetti dinner. Today we are inundated with options on store shelves, but that was not always so. There was a time when ready-to-serve canned foods were not available on store shelves. Let's travel back to 1894. The year produce vendor Joseph Campbell and icebox maker Abraham Anderson began to can and sell soup. They formed the partnership of Anderson and Campbell, a company that would change names through the years, but whose product would outlast them both and become iconic. Joseph Campbell had been growing and selling farm produce for several years. Abraham had begun as an icebox maker, but when the canning process was introduced, he opened a cannery in Camden, New Jersey. Joseph happened to come across Anderson's company and approached Anderson about becoming partners. The Anderson-Campbell Company was formed and began canning and selling vegetables, meats, jams, jellies, and more. While the partnership started out strong, the men soon decided to go their separate ways. No one knows exactly why, but the common belief is that Joseph, being an aspirational man, wanted to grow the company quickly, while Abraham, who was more cautious, wanted to take a slow and more sure-footed approach. In 1876, Joseph bought Abraham's share of the company. The company was then renamed the Joseph A. Campbell Preserve Company. Along with the new name, the company had a new partner, Arthur Dorrance. The two men would remain partners until Joseph Campbell retired in 1894. The two men had grown the company and added new products. One of those was beefsteak ketchup, added in 1896. This product would be a big success and soon make them competitors with the Heinz Company. Joseph Campbell passed away in 1900. Though he had married 3 times and had a son with Adeline and 4 children with Sarah, Joseph had chosen not to make his descendants primary owners or managers of the company. Upon his death, John T. Dorrance took over control of the company, removing the Campbell family from the company Joseph had begun. Dr. John T. Dorrance, the nephew of Arthur Dorrance, had been with the company for years by the time Campbell passed. When he was first hired, he was not satisfied with ketchup. He wanted to offer more. John had a degree from MIT and the University of Göttingen, which had brought him offers of many jobs in chemistry. But his heart was in his uncle's company. He felt the company needed a chemistry department and that the company's future was in food science. Arthur did not agree. At that time, food science was not a given standard like it is today. While Arthur did not see the significance of the chemistry of what went into the product, John did. Despite Arthur's lack of agreement on the matter, he gave John $7.50 a week salary and allowed him to set up a lab. John T. had to pay for all the equipment himself, but John didn't mind as long as he could work. One of John T.'s first pitches was to produce soup. At the time, while soup was a comfort food, it was an exclusive dish. The cost of the ingredients and the time-consuming labor to produce it, combined with the shipping cost, made the product too costly for the average family to afford. Arthur did not share John T.'s vision. He correctly pointed out that the shipping cost alone would make the product too expensive to convince consumers to purchase it. John began to search for a solution. Inspired by Gail Borden Jr.'s 1856 invention of condensed milk, John began to pursue a way to condense soup. Since the water in the soup added to the weight and increased the container size, if he could remove the water, they could can and ship soup cheaper. Consumers could then add water at home and quickly have a warm and satisfying meal. After much trial and error, John T. had his eureka moment. But now he had a new problem. While he was a great chemist, he was not a cook. His new soup formula would lower shipping costs and make it affordable for all, but it tasted terrible. A 30-cent can of soup could now be available for 10 cents, but the product would surely fail if he could not make it taste good. John, always a dedicated man, was not done yet. He decided he needed to learn to cook. So off to Paris Dr. Dorrance went. He was not to be deterred, nor was he going to settle for less than his best effort. John knew that Paris was the place to go to learn to cook. John had to start at the lowest rungs doing grunt work, but by the end of his trip, he was a culinary master. Soon he was able to produce condensed soups that were tasty. While John T. was working on the chemistry of their new product, Campbell Spielman, the son of Campbell's first partner, Abraham Anderson, attended a Cornell game and was taken by the team's crimson and white jerseys. Spielman, who had stayed with the company when his father had left it, proposed the use of the colors on the soup cans. The idea was accepted, and the cans became red and white in 1898. John T.'s persistence and success gave Arthur new faith in his nephew's abilities. Campbell's soup, with its now iconic labels, would soon transform American cooking and solve all the company's problems. But before that happened, John had to get people to taste the soup. Many Americans had never tried soup and were leery of it, even though it was cheap. They needed a solution fast. John T. Dorrance again discovered a solution. He took the product to the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. If they could win a medal, John felt that people would want to try the soup. Luckily, they were awarded a medal in the soup category. Dorrance, putting his marketing into action, added the image of that award to the center of each red and white soup can label. Consumers couldn't help but buy the soup that was globally recognized as the best when it was only 10 cents a can. This was just what the company needed. They had lost $60,000 the previous year. Nothing had distinguished them before from the competition. Condensed soup would be their redemption. In the years that followed, many varieties would be added to their production lines. In 1902, John T. Dorrance brought the first chef on board to make a larger variety of soups and to perfect recipes. During this time, Dorrance also invested in researching seeds and crops in order to grow the best produce for their products. The chemist in him knew that to continue to grow and prosper, test kitchens and food science were the keys. They needed superior produce and ingredients to create the best recipes. Campbell Soup Company's biggest competitor was Heinz, who also made soup. Because of this fight for consumers' attention, Dorrance began one of the first mass advertisements. He began advertising on streetcars and quickly doubled sales in the city. It was on these streetcar ads in 1904 that the Campbell's Kids, created by Grace Drayton, were introduced. These cherubic characters quickly stole the hearts of Americans. They would continue to be a part of the Campbell's ad and merchandise for decades. They could be seen taking Campbell's soup to school in their thermoses, working in gardens, or ice skating. Basically any activity that kids did, the Campbell's Kids did, with a can of soup in their hands. In 1914, John T. Dorrance bought all the outstanding Campbell stock, as well as his uncle's shares, for $3.4 million. This act made him the sole owner of Campbell's. Dorrance did not want to continue carrying a variety of products. He stopped production of all products other than soup and pork and beans. While other companies took out loans, Dorrance wanted everything to stay in-house and did not do anything that he could not pay for with earnings or a loan from another Dorrance. In 1915, the Campbell Soup Company purchased the Franco-American Company and soon produced canned pastas. John T.'s brother Arthur C. Dorrance would be president of that company. In 1965, Campbell Soup Company employee Donald Bork created SpaghettiOs, which would become a childhood favorite for years. John T. Dorrance knew that they needed to give the public clear ways to use their soups. So in 1916, Campbell's published its first cookbook, Helps for the Hostess. That was soon followed by Easy Ways to Make Good Meals. These cookbooks and those that followed so quickly a genius way to make money from the books as well as from many of the needed ingredients. In 1921, he renamed the company yet again, this time the Campbell Soup Company, to pay homage to their best-selling product rather than its inventor. During World War I, cases of Campbell's soups were sent to training camps and field hospitals. They were also sent in packages from home to give the troops comfort. On the home front, women who were now working in factories could cheaply and quickly feed their families warm, nutritious meals after their shifts by opening a can of Campbell's soup. John T. Dorrance passed away in 1930, a year after the stock market crash. He left the company strong enough to survive the Great Depression. His brother, Arthur C., would take over the helm of the Campbell Soup Company. Remember the good kid jingle? That was introduced in 1931 in Campbell's first radio advertisement. These new advertising measures helped Campbell's to become what Americans thought of when they thought of soup. In 1942, the company's sales topped $100 million. Heinz could not compete with the brand that Dorrance had developed for the company. In 1936, the Campbell's Playhouse was started after the famous War of the Worlds program by Orson Welles. The radio station was going to discontinue Welles' program when he had caused such great public panic with his story about the alien invasion. Campbell stepped in as the program sponsor, and Welles continued to put on quality dramatic programs, of course always making sure to announce that they were fiction. In 1946, James McGowan Jr. would become president of the company, where he would remain until 1953. Under him, many other companies would join the Campbell Soup family. In 1948, the company would acquire V8, adding juices to their lineup. This was a way for the company to branch into the juice segment. Fun fact, a couple years later, a young actor named Ronald Reagan would be seen in the V8 advertisements. 1950 saw another first for the Campbell Soup Company. It went public on the New York Stock Exchange. They began acquiring companies, including the frozen foods company C.A. Swanson & Sons in 1955, Pepperidge Farm Inc., Godiva Chocolatier, and Vlasic Foods. In 1981, Campbell's introduced its Prego spaghetti sauces. Also in the 1950s, Campbell's began to sponsor television programs like Lassie. These sponsorships increased Campbell's branding as a wholesale American company. Fun fact, Dorcas Riley created the green bean casserole recipe in Campbell's Test Kitchen in 1955. The casserole's ingredients were all products Campbell sold. This recipe, which is now a staple at Thanksgiving, was originally a great marketing tool. Another marketing tool was the adding of grilled cheese sandwiches to their ads for tomato soup right after the company acquired Pepperidge Farms, again quietly marketing their products together. In 1962, Andy Warhol made the Campbell Soup can iconic when he released a series of 32 canvases depicting the Campbell Soup can. There was one canvas for each variety of soup offered by Campbell's at the time. When he was questioned if the series was an advertising stunt or art, Warhol replied that he paints what he loves, and he loves Campbell's soup. In fact, Warhol was said to have eaten Campbell's soup for lunch daily. Now that Warhol had envisioned soup cans as art, Campbell's had their own idea of making the labels more than can coverage. In 1968, the soup can labels and a small fee, consumers could order paper dresses printed all over with the label designs. The dress was a hit, but since it was paper, most of them did not stand the test of time. However, the company does have a few in its archives. In the 1970s, with growing health concerns over things like sodium intake, Campbell's developed its Healthy Choice line, again showing its ability to adapt and stay current. In 1973, the company began its Labels for Education program. This program allowed schools and other organizations to redeem soup labels for sports equipment, computers, and other items used in the education of youth. This program was a huge success and again reinforced Campbell's image as a company that cared. In 1980, Gordon McGovern took over as president of the company. He went on a spending spree, taking out loans to purchase more companies. McGovern was the first president that did not follow John T. Dorrance's practice of not taking out loans. McGovern acquired 15 companies. Campbell's now had 334 new products, which was a burden for the company. In 1989, McGovern had caused the company's profits to decrease by 90%. Soup sales persevered during this time and helped to lessen McGovern's impact. In 1995, Campbell's acquired Pace, adding salsa to their lineup. In 2023, it acquired Rao's, adding pasta sauce. In 2016, Campbell's was the first major food company to endorse the movement to print GMOs on food labels. They took a lot of heat from other companies for doing this. In the last decade, Campbell's soup sales have declined. However, when the pandemic caused lockdowns, soup sales soared as consumers stocked up on non-perishable foods. During the quarantine, Campbell's attracted over 8.6 million new customers. In 2024, once again, the company name was changed. Soup was removed, and it is now simply called the Campbell Company, which it remains today.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and start with the history of Heinz next. So Henry John Heinz was known to say, "To do a common thing uncommonly well brings success." This was more than a slogan. It was a creed that Henry John lived by. More than likely, one of the many wise sayings passed on by John Henry Heinz, his father, and his mother, Anna Schmidt Heinz, both German Lutherans. Henry John's mother especially liked to recite maxims to her children to help them remember how to conduct themselves properly. John Henry Heinz came to America from Bavaria in the 1840s, a period where war, economic downturns, and religious strife led many Germans to immigrate to America in the hopes of finding better lives. John Henry was 29 years old when he arrived. He settled in Pittsburgh. Anna Schmidt would also travel from Bavaria to America 3 years later. The same year she arrived, she met John Henry, and they were married. The couple would have 8 children. The oldest would be their son, Henry John Heinz, whom they would call H.J. H.J.'s father worked for brickmakers. The family moved to Sharpsburg in 1850, 5 miles from Pittsburgh, where the ideal clay and shales for bricks were found, in order for his father to open his own brickmaking company. Like other German families, the Heinz family had a garden that covered several acres. These gardens contained vegetables including horseradish, which is a German favorite. All the Heinz children were expected to work in the garden, as it would be the source of much of the food that the family would need to sustain themselves. While his siblings performed the task out of respect and duty, H.J. enjoyed working amongst plants. At the age of 9, H.J. had his own small business. He sold surplus vegetables to other families in Sharpsburg. His mother, who had originally hoped her son would become a Lutheran minister, saw his love for gardening and opted to encourage him in that endeavor. His parents gave him 3 acres of his own. H.J. was thrilled with this gift and began experimenting with seeds and crops, trying to improve the quality of the produce. He would record these experiments in journals. He would also record items his customers liked or desired. This is a practice that he would continue throughout his entire life. The garden was not H.J.'s only source of employment. A hard worker, he also helped at his father's brickyard and worked as a towpath boy along the canal. The latter job would allow him to learn the ins and outs of transporting goods, lessons that would benefit him later in life. By the age of 15, H.J. knew that of the jobs he had done, he loved growing and selling produce the best, and that is what he wanted to do. Being brought up under the German Lutheran beliefs, H.J. treasured purity. In the teachings his mother had done, he had learned purity meant goodness. This would influence his business. It was a long and difficult, at 15, he started bottling horseradish. Until then, most people made it at home, and it was a long and difficult process, which included hand grating the horseradish, which meant bloody knuckles and watering eyes. In a time when factories were often filthy, H.J. kept his factory spotless. He used the best ingredients, including a clear vinegar that was harder to find rather than the cheaper apple cider vinegar that was commonly used in horseradish. H.J. also opted to put his horseradish into a clear glass bottle, which were more expensive than the commonly used brown bottles. H.J. felt these elements were worth it. It allowed him to make a quality product and to let people know that when they saw it, it would be high quality. He wanted it to be obvious that unlike his competitors, he was not hiding impurities behind brown glass. H.J. would also include in his advertisements statements of the natural and pure nature of his ingredients and processing. Another common practice used by factories was to use sawdust or floor scrapings as fillers. H.J.'s clear bottles exposed that he did not subscribe to these methods and that his ingredients were pure and natural. These distinctions and the fact that he personally traveled to Pittsburgh to pitch the product to restaurants, hotels, and grocers helped H.J. gain a good customer base. Another facet of his production was his desire, it was driven by his desire for purity and quality. He only wanted to use the best vegetables. He continued experiments on seeds and plants with the intention of creating the very best ingredients he could. He would later hire chemists and scientists to help with this. The importance of this research was something he had learned in the brickyard as he observed how important chemistry and temperature were to the brick-making process. It was also in the brickyard that he learned how to handle bulk materials. H.J. would carry a measuring tape in his pocket throughout his life, stopping to measure anything he found of interest, as well as items to be shipped. H.J. also traveled to his buyers. He felt that person-to-person meeting was essential in creating his brand. He later added salesmen to his employees. H.J. hand-selected these men and trained them himself. H.J. let them know that he would have no drinkers, swearers, or adulterers on his payroll. If any of the salesmen were reported or discovered to be even one of them, their employment would be terminated. H.J. was 24 in 1869. This was a key year for his business. He had a wealthy friend, Clarence Noble, that he partnered with, creating the Heinz Noble Company. Clarence and his brother were Heinz financial backers. This gave him the opportunity to expand his product line. They began to make and sell horseradish, fruit preserves, mustard, pickles, and ketchup. He would later call it ketchup with a K rather than the common ketchup with a C. He wanted to make this product distinction, and he used it to create a brand. Heinz was also the first company to bottle vinegar for home use. Prior to this, customers were required to bring buckets from home to purchase vinegar. 1873 found the Heinz Noble Company in dire straits. They had contracted for the entire crop of cucumbers from an Illinois farm. However, when the market crashed, prices dropped, and Heinz Noble found themselves with a lot of unneeded and expensive cucumbers. H.J. was devastated to find his company in bankruptcy, so much so that he took to his bed for an entire month. His father was so embarrassed by the bankruptcy that he became very ill and would enter a sanatorium where he would remain for the rest of his life. So despite these devastating blows, H.J. was not ready to give up. In the spring of 1876, he would have a new beginning with the financial help of his family. H.J.'s wife, who was Sarah, she went by Sally Heinz, his mother, Anna, and two cousins would invest in the new F&J Heinz Company. Because of the bad press brought on by the bankruptcy, H.J. did not want to use his own name and instead used his cousins, Frederick and John's first initials, so they became the F&J Heinz Company instead of H.J. Heinz. H.J. worked long, arduous hours to make his company successful. He not only succeeded in that, he also paid off every single penny that the Heinz Noble Company owed at the time of their bankruptcy. Again, showing the strength of his integrity and desire for an honest name. From his bankruptcy, H.J. took away a new philosophy of business. He would no longer go into debt. He would run his company with its own cash flow. 12 years after the F&J Heinz Company began, it was decided, because of strife amongst the family, that John would be bought out. There's always one. He was given $58,000 in 1888. That amount would be about $1.6 million today. It was at this time that the company again received a new name. It would now be called the H.J. Heinz Company, and H.J. would be the undisputable leader. H.J. was a master at marketing. He used the World's Fair to promote his products further, as well as to gain insights to bolster his own advertising endeavors. He paid attention to the 1876 World's Fair, making notes in his ever-present journal as to what the companies were doing to advertise their products and if the method was viable and successful. At the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, Heinz won several gold medals. So Campbell's won some, but so did
I
Heinz.
was going to say they were the same one. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Heinz was part of the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Here, in order to draw people into the agricultural building, a building where few entered, Heinz hired boys to pass out coupons for a free pickle pin, and suddenly it was worth climbing the 44 steps that would lead into the second floor of the ag building. Thousands of people arrived to claim their pin. The weight of them became a great concern. The building was not built to hold that many people. The second floor had to be reinforced to keep it from collapsing because pickle pins were that in demand. The stunt earned H.J. an award for drawing so many people in, and the pickle pin became a must for future fairs and events. And these pickle pins they would hand out at like when kids would come to the factory for field trips and stuff like that. So. Worth mentioning here is that of the branding slogan 57 varieties, or Heinz 57, H.J. came up with this now iconic catchphrase in 1896 while riding an elevated train. Out the window, he saw a shoe store advertisement that read 21 styles of shoes. Heinz decided on 57 varieties, though at the time he had over 60 products. It is said that he used his favorite number paired with his wife's to get 57. However it came to be, the slogan was a hit. H.J. was sure that it was everywhere people looked, from an electric billboard in New York to rocks creating it on hillsides across the U.S. H.J. even purchased a pier in Atlantic City, a popular spot at the time. The pier was named the Heinz Ocean Pier. Here, along with viewing art, listening to concerts, and enjoying lectures, Heinz had product sampling taking place. This marketing strategy caused Heinz products to rise 30%. H.J. Heinz Company grew and expanded. Salting stations were opening throughout the Midwest to keep the cucumber harvest fresh while they were being shipped to Pittsburgh, where they would become pickles. The Pittsburgh plant grew to a sizable 18 buildings. H.J. was dedicated to being a soil-to-consumer company, controlling all aspects from growing to packaging and delivery. To reach this goal, H.J. would build new factories closer to the fields to allow the produce to be processed without lengthy shipping process. By the 1890s, the H.J. Heinz Company was the largest food company in the U.S. and possibly the world, as the company could now be found overseas as well. Heinz was among the first American food companies to go overseas. England was one of their biggest consumers. They seemed to love Heinz baked beans, which had been introduced there, and they became a breakfast staple in England.
They eat beans to this day.
As the 1900s drew near, H.J., who had total control of the company up to that point, decided that he would start to pass control to his son Howard and his brother-in-law Sebastian Mueller. This would allow him to promote some causes he desired, to which he was involved in things like Sunday school, to the temperance movement, and so it gave him more time to do things like that. H.J. did not step away completely. He continued to control the company's strategy and plans for expansion until his death in 1919 at the age of 75. Fun fact, it is said that H.J. was adamant that his products not be used in bars or purveyors of alcohol. H.J.'s Lutheran upbringing gave him strong convictions about this matter, so much so that he would randomly walk into such places, and if Heinz ketchup or other products were being used, he would pull them all immediately, and would give the establishment's owner back the amount he paid to purchase the products. He would continue these practices until restaurants and hotels began to have bars within their establishments. In the early 20th century, the company joined forces with the U.S. Agriculture Department scientist Harvey Wiley to push for a Pure Food and Drug Act. Some companies had already adopted policies of cleanliness and of banning dangerous ingredients in order to either compete with Heinz or in the hopes of building their businesses into the empire that HJ had. Passed in 1906, this act would protect consumers. It eliminated the sale of rotten, putrid foods and medicines, which you wouldn't think needed to be said, but it did back then. It also would force companies to list their ingredients, including dangerous ones like arsenic, heroin, and cocaine. Under Sebastian Mueller, the company's food production became more efficient. It had the first fully electrified plants, was the first to produce its own bottles using the latest technology, and raised the production levels. Another distinction from their competitors was that Heinz opened their factory doors to visitors. They wanted the public to see how clean their facilities were. Even the stables, horses, and wagons were cleaned daily. The visitors walked into marble floors, stained glass windows, murals that included some of HJ's favorite maxims and sayings, as well as viewing their beautiful gardens and landscaping. The visitors totaled over 30,000 people a year. This is a picture inside the Pittsburgh factory in 1899. Fun fact, unlike most companies, as the cost of producing went down, H.J. Heinz lowered their price to benefit consumers. Finally, let's look at H.J. Heinz as an employer. As in all things, Heinz was fair and honest. At a time when coal mines and steel mills offered decent wages to work in dangerous and filthy environments, Heinz offered a lower salary but a fair one to work in a clean and safe environment. He also gave employees free medical and dental care. Along with these benefits, he created a rooftop garden for them to relax in, put in a swimming pool for them to enjoy, built an auditorium for them to hear lectures and concerts, offered employees weekend retreats, and helped new immigrants that worked for him gain citizenship and learn English.
Wow.
HJ was also one of the rare employers who offered women a chance to become foremen. This opportunity resulted in many wives and daughters of miners to seek employment at Heinz. As expected, HJ's beliefs came into play even as an employer. As with the salesman, he would not put up with drinking, swearing, adultery, or divorce by any of his employees. All were fireable actions. HJ's son, Howard, and grandson, Jack, would continue to treat employees well. However, when the movement began for factory workers to unionize to fight poor wages and conditions, as well as long hours prevalent at the time, the Heinz employees took the company to court to fight to be unionized. Jack, whose family had treated their employees exceedingly well for decades, took this as an insult to his family, who had treated their laborers in an admirable way. When he lost in court and the employees unionized, it is said that Jack would not look an employee in the eye, even if he had to speak with them for business purposes. If he was in the elevator with employees, he would turn his back to them. Actions not reflecting revenge, but as a way of letting them know that their affront altered their relationship with their employer. Today, Heinz has merged with Kraft Foods and has become Kraft Heinz. 49% of the business is owned by public shareholders, and the company sells about 30% of the world's ketchup market. An amazing feat for a business that started with a young boy who wanted to grow and sell food from his family farm.